I left my husband because I saw proof he was cheating. The problem was that the proof was fake and I didn't find out until a year later. But let me take you back to the beginning, because this story didn't start with a confrontation or a dramatic fight. It started on a Wednesday afternoon when I came home from work to find an envelope on our kitchen counter with my name on it, and no explanation of where it came from or who had left it there. My name is Kate, and at the time I was 31 years old, married to Tom for 3 years, living in a house we had bought together in Cincinnati, and by every measure I could think of, happy. Tom was a good man, steady, reliable, the kind of person who remembered the small things and showed up consistently and never gave me any real reason to doubt him. We had arguments like every couple does, small friction over dishes and scheduling and whose turn it was to call the plumber, but nothing serious, nothing that felt like a warning sign of anything bigger underneath. Tom's mother Margaret was a different story. She had never been warm toward me, not from the very first time Tom brought me home to meet her, not through the engagement, not through the wedding, not through the 3 years of marriage that followed. She was polite in the way that people are polite when they have decided they don't like you but have agreed with themselves to maintain appearances. She never said anything directly unkind. She just had a way of making me feel slightly wrong in every room she was in, slightly too loud, slightly too casual, slightly not quite what her son deserved. Tom saw it and it bothered him, and we had talked about it more than once. But he loved his mother and I loved him, and we had found a way to manage it. So when I came home that Wednesday and found the envelope, my first thought was not Margaret. My first thought was confusion, and then curiosity, and then something colder as I opened it and looked at what was inside. There were photographs. 3 of them, printed on regular paper, the kind of thing you print at home rather than at a photo shop. They showed Tom with a woman I didn't recognize, outside what looked like a coffee shop, and the images were close enough to be intimate without being explicitly anything. His hand on her arm. Her laughing at something he said. The 2 of them walking together with a familiarity that looked, to my eyes in that moment, like the familiarity of people who knew each other in a way they weren't supposed to. There was no note. No name. No explanation. Just the photographs. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. I went through the rational responses. This could be a colleague, a friend, a cousin, someone completely innocent whose existence I simply didn't know about. Tom knew a lot of people through work and through his running group and through a dozen other corners of his life that I wasn't present for every moment of. There were perfectly reasonable explanations for photographs of 2 people outside a coffee shop. But I didn't call Tom and ask him. I don't know exactly why. I think part of me was afraid of what his face would do when I showed him, afraid of catching something in his expression that I couldn't unsee. So instead I put the photographs in my bag and I waited for him to come home, and I watched him all evening for any sign of something different, some shift in his behavior, some tell. And he was exactly himself, easy and warm and completely normal, which somehow made it worse instead of better, because I had already decided in some corner of my mind that the photographs meant something and his normalcy felt like performance rather than innocence. I showed him the photographs 3 days later, after I had spent those 3 days cycling between believing him and not believing him without him knowing any of it was happening. His reaction was genuine confusion. He looked at the images and then looked at me and said he had no idea what this was or who had sent them, and that the woman in the photographs was someone from his office that he barely knew. He said her name was Amy and that they had grabbed coffee once with a group of colleagues, and that was the entirety of their relationship. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did believe him. But another part of me had been living with those photographs for 3 days and had built something out of them that was hard to dismantle with a simple explanation, and I told him I needed space to think. That space stretched from days into weeks. Margaret called me during that time, which she rarely did, and she was unusually warm and sympathetic and said she understood how painful this must be and that I deserved better. At the time I found her sympathy surprising but genuine. I was too inside my own pain to look at it clearly. After 6 weeks I asked Tom to move out. He went without argument, which he later told me was because he thought fighting would make things worse and that I needed to see he respected my boundaries. At the time I took his lack of fight as confirmation that something was wrong, that a truly innocent man would have pushed back harder. That is the thing about suspicion, it turns everything into evidence for itself. We divorced 8 months later. Tom signed the papers quietly. He told me he loved me and that he didn't understand what had happened to us and that he hoped one day I would tell him. I didn't have an answer for him because I didn't fully have one for myself, just those 3 photographs and the story I had built around them. And then, almost exactly 1 year after I found that envelope, I walked into a coffee shop on a Saturday morning and the woman behind the counter looked at me and smiled and said, "You're Kate, aren't you? Tom's wife?" I stood at that counter and looked at her and said yes, almost automatically, before my brain had fully processed what was happening. She said her name was Amy. And I felt the floor shift slightly under me because I knew that name. Tom had told me her name the night I showed him the photographs, the woman from his office, the one he said meant nothing. She was friendly and completely at ease, the kind of person who talks to strangers like she has known them for years, and she said something about how she had always wanted to meet me because Tom talked about me so much at the office. She said it casually, warmly, with no awareness at all of what those words were doing to me on the other side of the counter. I said, carefully, that Tom and I were no longer together. Her face changed immediately, not with guilt or calculation, just with genuine surprise and something that looked like sadness. She said she hadn't known, that she had left the company about 8 months ago and lost touch with most people there, and that she was sorry to hear it because Tom had always seemed so devoted to me. I don't know what made me say the next thing. Some combination of a year's worth of weight and the specific surreal quality of standing in front of this woman who had no idea she had been the reason my marriage ended. I said, "Can I ask you something directly?" She said yes. I said, "Were you and Tom ever anything more than colleagues?" She looked at me with complete and open confusion. She said no, absolutely not, that Tom was friendly with everyone but had always been very clearly devoted to his wife, and that she had never had any kind of personal relationship with him outside of work. She said they had grabbed coffee once with a group of people from the office and that was it. She said, "Why are you asking me this?" I told her about the photographs. I described them, the coffee shop, his hand on her arm, the 2 of them walking together. She listened and then she said something that stopped me completely. She said, "That sounds like the day our whole team went out after the Henderson project wrapped up. There were 8 of us. Whoever took those photos only showed you 2 of us. 8 people. Cropped down to 2. To look like something it wasn't." I sat down at one of her tables because I needed to sit down. She brought me a coffee without asking and sat across from me and we talked for almost an hour. She was generous with her time and her clarity and she answered every question I asked without hesitation, and by the end of that hour I knew 2 things with complete certainty. Tom had never cheated on me. And someone had gone to deliberate, careful trouble to make me believe that he had. I drove home and I sat in my apartment and I went back through everything, the envelope with no return address, Margaret's unusual warmth during those weeks, the way she had called me unprompted and said I deserved better. And it assembled itself in front of me with a clarity that made me feel sick, because it was so obvious once I was looking at it directly, and so completely invisible when I hadn't been. I called Tom that evening. He picked up on the second ring. I said I needed to talk to him and he said okay, when, and I said now if he was willing, and he said he would be at my door in 20 minutes. He was there in 15. We sat at my kitchen table and I told him everything, Amy, the coffee shop, the conversation, the 8 people cropped down to 2. I watched his face move through confusion and then understanding and then something that looked like grief, not for himself but for the year we had lost. When I finished he was quiet for a long moment and then he said, "My mother." It wasn't a question. I said I thought so. He said he needed a day and then he would know for certain. He called me the next evening. He said he had driven to his mother's house and sat down with her and told her what he knew, and that after about 10 minutes of denial she had admitted it. She had taken those photographs herself on the day of the team outing, cropped them, printed them, and left them in our house with her own key while I was at work and Tom was at the office. She said she had done it because she believed I was wrong for her son, that I made him less than he was, that he deserved someone better and would never leave on his own because he was too loyal and too in love to see clearly. She said she had done it out of love. Tom told her that what she had done had cost him a year of his life and his marriage and that love did not look like that. He told her he would need significant time before he was ready to have any relationship with her. He told her that the life he wanted was his to choose, not hers, and that the life he wanted was with me. Then he called me. We met for dinner 2 days later, just the two of us, at the same restaurant where he had proposed 4 years earlier. Neither of us planned that, it just happened to be the place we both thought of. We talked for 3 hours. We said the things that needed saying, the hurt, the confusion, the year of not understanding, the grief of it. And then we said the other things too, the ones that had always been true underneath all of it. 6 months later we stood in front of a judge and signed new papers. Different papers this time. Tom's relationship with his mother is complicated now, and I think it will be for a long time. She is not someone I trust, and I don't pretend otherwise. But Tom handles that part of his life and I handle mine, and we have agreed that she does not get to be in the center of what we are building. On the morning we moved back into our house together, Tom carried the last box through the front door and set it down in the kitchen and looked at me and said, "I want to do this right this time." I said, "We were doing it right. We just had some interference." He laughed and said that was one way to put it. I made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table, and that was that.